Ah, yes, friends. On a Friday morning, it is, of course, OGP, One Giant Podcast, where, as always, I am Adam Arbrick, covering the New York Football Giants and also the Brooklyn Nets for the Locked On Nets podcast, joined by the healthy, the wealthy, the wise, Mr. Andrew Makowitz. How are we, sir? We are on mute, and he's taking his time. He's gonna give us the full impact. He's gonna
look at
check it
that.
out on the weekend already. This guy can't be stopped.
I was just gonna say, it's actually pretty ironic what I was saying. I was like, Adam, we're gonna do a nice quick hitter this morning. It's too nice out for the listeners to be inside listening to us. It's too nice for us to be inside. We got to go enjoy the day, but we do have to give the updates from Giant training camp and as well as around the league.
You better believe it. And let's start there on a Friday. It is around the league. We've done this a couple of times now because there are some interesting notes that we kind of pick up on around the NFL. And the big note is, did you catch it? Football's back. Last night, the NFL kicked off with a Hall of Fame game. Not a lot of people of note necessarily, especially under center on either side of the ball, but we're inching closer. We talk about this all the time when it comes to the draft, the offseason. Once you see a preseason game, I think that's when it starts to simmer for everybody of, okay, that means there's only a couple of these now, and then we're really going to get into meaningful football. We're a month away from real counting towards your final season record football being played.
It's funny because I said to myself in the morning I wasn't going to tune in because nobody plays, but I think Colin Cowherd said it on his show. He's like, oh no, you'll tune in. Like you just will. And like maybe you'll tune in for the first 5 minutes. You just want to get all the feels back of the NFL being back in business. And I also was just kind of curious. It was Cowboys versus Steelers last night, opening game. We knew we weren't going to see the top quarterbacks with Dak still hurt. What I wanted to see was the Cowboys defense and the overreactions of people being like, look, Cowboys defense is back, 16 points in the first game. It's like, it's laughable when I don't know how much of it you watched. I watched like the first drive of the Steelers and they were carving up the Dallas defense like Swiss cheese until some backup guy fumbled the ball on a snap. Right. So it's like, I can't wait until we get in the regular season. Everyone's like the Dallas Cowboy defense is fixed. And then they give up 35 in the first game.
I've been savoring the flavor on the Olympics, as everybody may know if you're following me on Twitter. I've been enjoying handball, water polo, the equestrian. Have you seen horses dance in rhythm to music across? I mean, it's all so epic. So I didn't watch a single second of that game last night. I watched the highlights a bit, and you saw those reactions, and I think most people that know the NFL or at least follow it and cover it tell you, the thing, and we heard this about Giants training camp. The defenses always look stronger in camp because everything is more simple for them. It's very much, here's what we're doing, now go execute. Everything else on the offensive side is about nuance, right? It's about timing. It's about rhythm. It's who's in, who's out. So when you try to take away, and it's not just because it's the Cowboys, anybody in these preseason games, when you try to take away, look how strong the defense looks. Well, guess what? You were going up against Mason Rudolph. Like, let's not, and likewise for the Steelers, you weren't playing
Garrett Gilbert. You're playing against Garrett Gilbert.
There's a reason why you look so good. You're going up against a quarterback that isn't going to see the field optimistically for most NFL teams.
Adam, the most disrespectful thing, and we can skip past this game after this, is I'm listening to the broadcast and Garrett Gilbert comes out there as the number one quarterback, and the announcers, the first thing out of their mouth is Dallas really needs to upgrade their number one quarterback behind Dak Prescott. Like, they really need a quality backup quarterback. That's what they need with his injury risk, as Garrett Gilbert's like under center snapping the ball, like getting his chance to perform. It felt like they were just slapping that guy in the face. That was pretty tough to hear.
Might as well
like watching your kid
out there for all they're concerned.
Imagine you're Garrett Gilbert's parents and you're like, all right, here we go. He's in the big show starting it. And like the first thing they're like, Garrett Gilbert, who likely will not be the backup this year. You're like, wow, thanks. Great.
Garrett Gilbert, who should have gone back to law school instead of pursuing a career in athletics, but he's out there, folks. Yeah, 100%. The dreams being dashed. It comes fast and furious, friends. It happens for us all. We just don't know when. For Garrett Gilbert, it was last night in a preseason football game. That's where he just learned he's never going to reach the pinnacle of success. Now, if we turn our attention to training camp, to the New York Football Giants and what's been going on, we'll start with, and there's a bigger piece to get to, but let's hit some of those injury updates that we've been talking about. Guys have been on either the COVID injured reserve list, have come and gone with some small nagging injuries. We didn't get to say, I think we mentioned the hamstring injury for Kenny Golladay in the last episode. Officially going to be 2 to 3 weeks that he'll be out. Not necessarily overly concerning. I will say, though, when you start to gauge about how you feel about an NFL football team, I did think about it like this. Take off Kenny Golladay from this team. Say he's gone for the season, right? How much would it change your perspective on what the Giants can do? When you go around and look at other teams, some of the upper echelon teams, take Mike Evans off of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Is that a big loss? Yes. But would it dramatically change how you looked at Tampa Bay's season? Possibly not, right? Because they're a more complete team. They're a Super Bowl winning team. So that's why an injury like this is still worth monitoring. And you're not going to get as much rhythm time with Daniel Jones. You're basically going to be coming back in ready for week one, we assume, but there's not going to be a lot of reps there.
Yeah, well, I mean, in Tampa Bay, that was a good example with Mike Evans. It's like, if you take Tom Brady off that team, we already know what that team is. They're a 500 team because that's what they were with Jameis Winston the entire time that he was there. A wide receiver can only impact, a handful of moments in a game, whereas the quarterback is just far, far more valuable, which just points to Daniel Jones being the most critical piece of the puzzle for the Giants. I'm starting to nickname Kenny Golladay Bubble Wrap because I just want him to be wrapped in some kind of nice, neat packing tape, bubble wrap until game one of the NFL season, because I can't afford to have a nagging hamstring injury that lingers on it and maybe during the season keeps him out 3 or 4 weeks, Adam.
No, 100%. But it is a balance. So keep him safe, keep him protected. That's great. The only thing that I'll say is we talked about it in the offseason, talked about pursuing him in free agency. Well, what happened there in Detroit? Was it the injury? How serious was it? Was it that he was just kind of done being in Detroit? If it's one reason, then you say, who cares, whatever. If it's just that the injury was big, right? And now he's trying to come back from that. He's trying to get himself in conditioning. You don't want to see these type of injuries linger into the season. And even now, as we stand right here today, all it tells me for sure is that Sterling Shepard becomes even more important to this team in the short term, as does Evan Ingram, by the way, because these are guys that have been here, have the most familiarity out of the receiving and tight end groups with Daniel Jones. So now they need to step up, carry the load if necessary, be 100% locked in week one in case any of these players, in this case, Kenny Golladay, need an extra week or are going to be maybe not be 100% going into the season. That being said, he's not the only guy that got hurt and not as important of a player, but does have a little bit of a deeper impact as far as this roster is concerned.
Yeah, so Levine Toilolo came down with an Achilles tear, which everybody knows.
And down with an Achilles tear. Like, he came down with the flu. He caught the flu.
I mean, he probably landed a little bit awkwardly.
Yeah.
It kind of came down with it. And Adam, from working with his Locked On Nets stuff, knows how brutal an Achilles injury can be to an athlete and how long it can take. So Toyola is out for the season. It's a really interesting situation for the Giants because if you remember a couple of weeks ago, it feels like a couple of weeks ago, Kelvin Benjamin basically was walked off the field and left the Giants. Now all of a sudden, an area where we thought we had too many tight ends, where we had 5 or 6, we're down to basically 3 with Kyle Rudolph, Evan Ingram, and Caden Smith. Any quick thoughts about how quickly things change in training camp?
Yeah, I mean, the interesting part about this is Kelvin Benjamin. We're going to touch on him again in a second. Okay, yeah, that was a flyer, right? Toaloa, again, we had him last year. He was higher on the depth chart. Okay, it's not the end of the world. I think the bigger piece is because right now, if you said we have Evan Ingram, Rudolph, and Smith, great. That's a great 3-man tight end group. But we also know that Rudolph is trying to make sure that he's going to be 100% healthy, right? So when you throw that into the mix too, now you're just saying, what does this depth piece look like for us? Losing a little bit of the blocking, obviously, that you get with Toaloa, and then Rudolph would be the next best or better than Toaloa, even arguably in pass and run protection, potentially out of the position. So you want to add in a depth piece. I don't love it, obviously, but I'm not that concerned with it because, again, our top 3 right now is the best tight end group we've had in a number of years. You're still going to want to bring a body into camp, and I would assume it's specifically going to be a guy that you say, who is a 6th offensive lineman for us?
Well, ironically, that's not what the Giants decided to do. They went out and they signed former Penn State quarterback Tommy Stevens who is now converted over to the tight end position.
Not the route I thought they would have gone, Andy.
Yeah, you're like a big-bodied offensive lineman blocking. No, they went with a former quarterback who now has switched over to tight end. Tommy Stevens, backed up Trace McSorley at Penn State, transferred to Mississippi State, got drafted in the 7th round by the New Orleans Saints. They tried to convert him to a tight end, a la Tim Tebow type situation. He was on and off their practice squad. The Carolina Panthers signed him to their practice squad, reconverted him back to a quarterback so that he could back up Teddy Bridgewater and whomever else. And I think he got in a handful of snaps at quarterback last year, and now is signing with the Giants to go back to playing tight end. So, like, it feels a little bit like Michael Scott from The Office, like snip, snap, snip, snap. Is he a quarterback? Is he a tight end? Like, what's going on here? But, the Giants needed depth. This is a guy that's bounced around for the last year. Not the route that you thought they were going to take at him.
Well, but by the way, though, it's, right now you have Daniel Jones, Mike Glennon. Is there going to be a third quarterback on the roster or not with, potentially Thorson there? Like, this may be an opportunity for the Giants to label somebody who's been converting positions as a tight end and also say, hey, if we had a worst case scenario, how do we cover our bases, or how do we have a guy that can do some scouting for us, right, on a week-to-week basis? Maybe that's also the benefit of bringing a player like that. Again, when you're talking about the 4th tight end on the depth chart, it's interesting to say the least, but we'll see what happens. This guy gets picked up now. He could be cut in a week. You don't know how that rolls through, because as we turn our attention to what's been maybe the most exciting part of the offseason, I'll acknowledge this. We mentioned just before Kelvin Benjamin, who, following being dismissed from the team, also dismissed himself from the NFL, announcing his retirement. It really waters down a lot of the commentary that he had heading out the door about what's going on, and they don't understand. Then you go, also, though, when I took a long look in the mirror, literally my agent told me no one else is signing me, so it's come to a sad end. Other players, though, like the linebacker Davis, when they just signed him, when they brought him into camp, I said on Twitter, hey, this is a veteran guy with a lot of experience. Like, don't be surprised if he finds his way into the 53, because he's not that old. And the depth piece, everything else we've mentioned about guys in and out, where is a player like O'Shane Ximenez on the hierarchy, all those pieces. He's retired. And that's not the only guy that retired. There's more, Andy.
Yeah, well, let's stick with Davis at first, because it was interesting. He came into camp. Joe Judge is like, I sat down with him. Good guy, gets it. Like, excited to see what he does out there. 3 days later, he's like, nope, I'm done. And there's been some interviews done with Todd Davis since then, and they're like, what happened? He was like, I came in. I've done this in the league for quite a while. It now feels like I have to start over, and I'm trying to like regain respect when I've already been at like a high level here. And like, I just didn't want to start over again, which was interesting. But he did say that he thought the coaching staff was great. He thought that the Giants were treating him well, and that, he thinks the Giants are going to be good this year. But it just seems like he was like, man, I got to start all the way at the back. I don't know if I'm going to make the roster. I'm so far behind some of these other, linebackers. Do I really want to put myself through this? Let me just go start my real estate career that I wanted to anyway.
Well, yeah, I mean, not to be disparaging towards Davis, you can say, I didn't want to start at the back of the pack again, et cetera. But what you're really, if that was the case, then you'd be, again, this feels like Davis more accomplished than Kelvin Benjamin. But you'd be saying, right, but you could go play for someone else, right? There's other teams that are going to have spots here. So the fact that you chose to retire, I think, is indicative more of you got yourself into a camp, and maybe you just realized, right? Like, I don't quite have it the way I once did. And as a veteran, and that's fine then to say, and now as a veteran, am I going to try to fight my way past some young players on the Giants roster that I know they want out there on the field? Or am I good? And by the way, I respect a player that says, I don't have the drive anymore that's required to be out there. I'm probably going to either do myself more harm than good or the team more harm than good. So I'm all set. And that's fine.
Yeah, it's completely fine. Listen, he just didn't. He didn't want to take the whole uphill climb to even make the roster spot. Never mind, be a contributor on this team. Kudos to him. glad that he was around for 3 days.
And real quick on, yeah, exactly. We're talking about guy who was here for 3 days. Real quick on that before we move into a different position, a different on the other side of the ball here. One of the things that may have played a factor in the way he thought about it and the way the Giants are thinking about things, Cam Brown has been getting a lot of praise in camp. They're using him both inside and outside from all perspectives on the defensive side of the ball. They're saying we don't want to limit where we can utilize him. You can talk about Carter Coughlin. They moved him inside as well. I think if we want to take a positive out of this, it's that the young guys are looking good. The young guys are getting reps, and it's going to make it harder for veteran players to move up that hierarchy. So if you're a guy like Davis or anybody coming into the squad, you take a look around the landscape and you say, going to be a little bit harder to get ahead of some of these young guys than I anticipated. What is then on the offensive side, which I'm going to try. It's Friday, so I'm going with positive vibes, but fill us in on the recent developments across the line, one of which had basically happened as we finished on Wednesday.
Yeah, so Wednesday, the most recent signing that we were talking about, veteran offensive lineman Joe Looney came in. We said it was a good signing. You know, PFF grade wasn't great, but could play multiple interior positions. He announced he was retiring. He basically came in and was like, looked left, looked right, said, nope, don't have it anymore.
Yeah.
Not going to do it. And so he retired before we even knew it. The surprising one was just recently announced. I think it was this morning that swing guard Zach Fulton, who we signed in the offseason to a $1.2 million deal, announced that he's retiring as well. And, you know, I have some thoughts about that. It was surprising for me to hear that. But what were your instant reactions to hearing that about Fulton?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to, reverse engineer it, but when you go back to a player like Shane Lemieux going down, and all of a sudden Wiggins was the one that stepped in, right? So if we backtrack it, we go, okay, so that means that Wiggins was looking better in camp. This is where I'm talking about positive vibes only on a Friday, friends. I'm going to take the approach that what happened here was, remember we talked about, well, why did you choose to let a guy like Zeitler go, right? And then you bring in Fulton to replace him. I don't entirely follow the logic on the perspective, maybe on a Will Hernandez, but I think the Zach Fulton signing was closer to, we want to have a veteran backup ultimately, as opposed to this guy may rise to the top and be our starter. And that could be a little bit, putting the lipstick on a pig here, because everyone was going to compete and you want the best three to get out there. But if I want to look at it and say, Shane Lemieux, assuming it's not that serious, maybe the Giants really did feel like with this new regime, we can remold Will Hernandez. It was difficult to do it on the fly last year, but we can get him there. These guys are all just a drop in the hat, bodies on the roster to make sure you have backups. Thuney means nothing to me in terms of the retirement. I wasn't a big fan of it when they brought him in the first place. Fulton is surprising, and also it doesn't really move the needle for what my expectations are going into the season.
Well, so going into the season, I thought that Zach Fulton was going to be our swing guard. That was my expectation. He could play multiple positions, has a bunch of experience, but the writing was on the wall with the moves that the Giants were making. Shane Lemieux goes down. You think, okay, great. Zach Fulton is going to be the guy. It's not. It's Kenny Wiggins, as you mentioned, right? Then all of a sudden they're like, okay, so next man up, got to be Zach Fulton, right? Absolutely. Then all of a sudden they go out and they're like, we need to pick up another guard. Let's go pick up Joe Looney. And so all of a sudden, Zach Fulton's looking around. He's like, well, I got lapped by Wiggins. They're pulling guys off the street that they want to start in front of me. Like, he's looking left, looking right. He's just there as a warm body in camp and is never going to get an opportunity to do first team reps. So like the Giants transactions and the way they treated this whole thing was a clear indicator that they signed Zach Fulton to have some promise. Ultimately, it just didn't work. And they wanted to see what they could get out of other guys, right?
Yes, 100%. Now, here's the couple of things, though. So I'm looking over the depth chart, right? Obviously, so you take Fulton out, and at least with Lemieux or Will Hernandez, one of the two of them, Lemieux's out right now. So Wiggins gets bumped up theoretically for the purposes of training camp. I think, again, my boy Brett Hedgie still hanging in there. He's there backing up in the middle. He has some potential to be a multiple position guy. And then you think about guys that have been around this roster now in Jake Burton and Kyle Murphy, Chad Slade, right? That's a very familiar name to Giants fans. So can these guys prove something for themselves? I don't anticipate them really having an impact, but I'll keep coming back to your boy, Nate Solder. All this dude has to do is not get hurt and keep showing up. And he's going to be on this roster. Like that's what we're saying for sure. The one guy, and to give this the bigger perspective of, a lot of people have been saying, what's going on, right? The exit interviews on some of these guys, is Joe Judge and all this mentality that he has around the training camp, blah, blah. Listen, if you can't make it through practice, I don't want you come week 1. Because if you can't do it now, you're not going to do it for 17 weeks. So I like thinning out the herd, so to speak. And so far, no news is good news. We know that Nate Solder had to work himself back into football shape, but it's really scripting itself nicely for Nate Solder to be on this roster. I have no clue what the role is going to be, but this is just survival at this point, and he's doing it. And I think it garners respect, though, by the way, from Joe Judge, from Dave Gettleman, right? Like they like this guy as a person. They respect him on and off the field, even if he's a diminished player from where he once was. But this is gut check time. Be there, do it, right? If you can do it, then you can be a part of it, and I'll respect him for it.
Adam, I'm a little upset. You gave credit to Joe Judge. You gave credit to Dave Gettleman. I didn't hear credit for your co-host, Andy Makowitz, who's been talking about how Nate Solder is going to be on this roster. He might even be fighting for a starting spot. I've said that before. You've told me Nate Solder is washed. He's not going to make the roster.
As the old
We're never going to see him again.
Friend,
and
when
now
blind squirrels are pulling up nuts, you don't applaud them for it.
Listen, we're going to look back on this episode.
Yeah.
When he is contributing to the offensive line in the regular season, and you're going to be like, you know what? I thought he had nothing left in the tank, and here he is starting a game contributing for a Giants team with a winning record. I just can't wait for that day because you can feel it coming. All these other guards are getting injured or retiring, and Andrew Thomas is getting light work days, so people are moving around the offensive line. Nate Solder's getting more reps. He said he finally feels healthy after opting out of 2020 and all the COVID stuff. I'm excited, Adam. I got to
make a note. August 7th, 2021, 9:46 a.m. In about 2 days' time, when Nate Solder announces his retirement, we'll be back here talking about
you will be able to say I told you so at that moment. When he steps back on the field in a meaningful game, I'll take a victory lap. Me, Joe, and Dave will get together and we'll say we never gave up on you, Nate.
Hands together out on stage like in the theater, taking a bow. It's not just about me. It's an ensemble effort here. I surely agree that will be the case. Listen, we'll see how it plays out.
Listen, just like Joe Judge, you could call me coach if you want. Just like with the way that I care about my players like that, like my guy Nate. Just if you want, just call me coach from now on.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, I will say, this is Jason Garrett. End of the day press conference. He's having a conversation. He says, "All right, great to see you guys." And someone said, "Thanks, Jason." And while exiting, he went ahead and let him know, "Yeah, coach, you can go ahead and call me coach. That's how we do it here. Thanks a lot, guys." And just kind of went off. Now, I'm going to give a shout out to one of my Locked On Network cohorts. Initially, I was like, yeah, listen, this seems silly on both sides. Like, is it silly that Jason Garrett wants to be referred to as coach? Sure. Is it also like weird and silly that every media member immediately got this thing to Twitter and was like, "Oh, really, Jason Garrett? You want to be called coach? Well, here it seemed like a whole bunch of nonsense." And I was like, I don't care. He wants to be called coach, call him coach. He was a head coach for a long time. That's what he wants to be. Who cares, right? Like, who cares? Peter Bukowski, who covers the Packers, he does a lot of stuff for NFL, NBA content as well. He framed it, though, as going forward, you'll refer to me as podcaster. And I was like, well, son of a gun, if you didn't frame that in a way that if I used it, I'd be like, well, that's embarrassing.
You're like, I sound ridiculous, right? Yes. Okay, so can I clear things up? Because
sure.
Twitter universe got a hold of this over the last 24 hours, and it's taken on something that it never was. And so, Adam, I'm here to help enlighten you, educate the OGP listeners. This is very simple. Jason Garrett was giving his press conference, and the mood was like asking questions. Everyone's just kind of whatever. And Jason Garrett, for a decade, has been like known as one of the nicest coaches in the league, far and away. And the media loves working with him.
Right.
He says, "Good to see you guys," as he's leaning down to pick up his papers. He doesn't get a response. No one says anything to him. And so he looks back up after he picks his stuff up. He goes, "Good to see you guys." Like, hey, like I'm saying, like, have a good weekend. And no one's responding to him. Yeah. And so they said, "You too," yeah. And he looked around. He's like, "Hey, the proper response is like, good to see you too, coach." And like, it's like, hey, just like, let's exchange pleasantries. It wasn't about the emphasis on the word coach. It was like, he's like, it's good to see you guys. And no one says anything. And he's like, hey, thanks, guys. Like, I'm here. I'm up here. Like, and he's joking around with them. He's like, so next time, maybe when I say good to see you say good to see you, coach. And he like walked off, and he walks off and he goes, good to see you, as he's like walking away. And so like everyone took this thing as him being like the Deion Sanders thing. Call me coach. I've earned it. I've earned my pinstripes by being a coach for 5 minutes in this league, prime time, right? Like whatever. Jason Garrett was basically like having fun being a nice guy with the media, and did not want them to call him coach. He doesn't care. In the decades plus that he's been coaching, he has never once cared whether they called him Jason or coach.
Well, there you go. See, and I listen. I stay above the fray on this stuff. I'm not going to get into the muck and the mire, but that's where Andy Makowitz lives. He's down in there.
I live there.
Plucking up lily pads and finding bullfrogs of information and just knowledgeable nuggets to share with everybody. Yeah. Well, that's what I mean. Like, I guess overall, I was like, yeah, I don't know, like, who cares, whatever. And then, like you say, so from that standpoint, and we talked about Jason Garrett a lot, and we've ragged on him a bit, and expectations, all this stuff. I'll tell you this. When I say goodbye to someone and I don't get a farewell in return, it's like, goodbye. And however you want to reference me, as Adam, as podcaster, your choice. But just letting me know, we are here in this is a two-way street that we're having as far as a conversation, whether it's on a professional level or not. So good for Jason Garrett. And then, by the way, I'll be referring to exclusively him as coach going forward.
It's funny because we do rag on Jason Garrett quite a bit here with some of the conservative play calling selections, and I would be the first to put my hand up if he was dead serious about this whole thing and it played out the way that other people thought it played out, to be like, all right, if you're going with this hardo act, like, this is not you, Jason. Like, we got to change this around, Jason. No, like it'd be ridiculous. But to his credit, he's been so nice with the media, and he always is available and pretty forthcoming with things. I mean, just tell him that it's good to see him. He just wants a little love back. He doesn't even care if you call him coach or Jason. Just say it's good to see him. He hasn't seen you in a while. COVID protocols. No one's been around. Come on, help our guy Jason coach Garrett out.
He's lonely. That's all that is. Listen, this was the proverbial Joe Judge-ment Day episode for the One Giant podcast. As some of these guys are coming and going, we'll see. There's going to be a long weekend here, so we may come back in early next week, have some updates about what they're doing with the offensive line. Again, they brought in a tight end / quarterback, but things are going to be evolving here, I think, over the next week or so, because the Giants certainly want to start to get themselves set in terms of what the depth looks like. You don't want to be rolling over players at certain positions. And I will just footnote, keep an eye on Reggie Ragland, who was also brought in this offseason. He's been unable to get on the field. He's now being thrown into the on the bubble for making the roster, again, because if you're not here for reps, it's hard to identify your role, especially joining a new team. So things are fluid right now. I'm optimistic about some of the young guys there, but this is going to be as they say, interesting next couple of weeks, I think, in Big Blue Land.
Yes, it is indeed. The dog days of summer are coming to an end, Adam. We are going to get live football. No more red jerseys for Daniel Jones. We're getting the New York Giants blue and white jersey. I'm just pumped, and I'm excited that for the rest of the season, we're going to be able to talk about actual football games, even if they're preseason. But man, football is back.
Feel free to take yourself back onto mute, Andy Makowitz, as we remind the people to follow us on social media at One Giant Podcast, rate and review the podcast, and as Andy will allow you, unmuted, to know that he demands the people hear.
As always, let's go Big Blue.